Hey, pastors and leaders of multi-ethnic churches or organizations. My name is Greg. I'm the pastor of Renew Church in Chicago, also the host of the Gospel and Race podcast. And for the last few years, I've just been thinking about a space for us, a place where leaders of multi-ethnic organizations can come and discern the complexities of such ministry together. And it's hard to find, but we've made it happen, all right? So I want to introduce you to something called the Imago Leaders Network. It's a relational network of mission-minded multi-ethnic leaders who will come together and discern the complexities of multi-ethnic ministry. How do we plant churches faithfully in spaces that need multi-ethnic engagement, etc. But anyways, January 18th, I want to invite you to an informational. It's going to be at 7 p.m. virtually. You need to go to imagoleaders.com, register there. We'll send you all the information, and let's hear some vision as to how this relational network can be add value to what God is doing in your life and in your ministry, and how you can add value to our lives and our ministry in Jesus' name. I'll see y'all January 18th. Peace. Gospel and Race podcast, special podcast today that I'm so excited about because we are honoring the legacy of Martin Luther King and his contribution to American ecclesiology, to the civil rights movement, to the racial disparities of our country. And there's one person I'm gonna call. There's one person I'm gonna call. That's Pastor Mashall Hatch. Y'all give it up. Pastor Hatch, welcome.
Glad to be here, Pastor
Come
Greg
on.
Armstrong. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for being here, and you know what you mean to me. And I mean, I've said this to you before. I labeled you a mentor. I know I never come out and be. I know I never get to the West Side like I should, but I'm like, that's my mentor. That's who I'm listening to. I've known you since I was a little boy. I mean, I'm a little boy. My grandfather's church on the West Side. We both have great West Side history here in Chicago. And so I've watched you all my life. And so coming back to Northern Seminary, you being a professor, working at Northern, it was just full circle for me.
Absolutely.
And I just want to say thank you for being here as we talk about MLK.
Absolutely.
Tell us what I got your bio and all that, but
what people need to know is, you casually mentioned your West Side roots. It's a lot more profound than that. His grandfather, your grandfather, Dr. Frank McCall, pastored on the West Side, and he pastored in the season that Dr. King lived in the neighborhood where your grandfather's church was, in Lawndale. And so it's this incredible history. And, of course, Dr. King lived in Chicago, had a residence there in 1966 when he moved his movement from south to north. And it's then he becomes, according to, the historians, a national leader as opposed to a regional leader. So that whole Chicago connection is a very important part of the King narrative. And then, of course, he becomes global, within a year as he opposes the Vietnam War. Yeah. And then he becomes almost eternal when he is literally slain as a prophet a year after that. So that's your grandfather's church is right in that neighborhood. And of course, we have a connection. Your grandfather's successor was a young man that I baptized and deaconized him, and then licensed him as a preacher, and then installed him as a pastor over the years. And so we've got an incredible connection.
I love it.
Anyway.
And I'm walking in that lineage.
Yeah.
And the other powerful thing is that you are still leading, having seen some generations of my family, and you're still doing the work. And now you're helping disciple me in what you witnessed all them years ago. That's powerful, right?
Absolutely.
That's legit.
And your daughter, my daughter, and you were part of the gospel choir
at
Northern, which was the largest and the best gospel choir in the whole state of Illinois.
Say it again. So powerful lineage.
Amen.
And I'm not going to pull up your bio, but if you can give us some bullet points, you've got a long history of activism, pastoral ministry, presence, being a practitioner, being a scholar, an academic. Name us some of the things that you've been a part of as a preacher.
This coming first Sunday, which is in a few 2 days from now, will be my 39th year as a pastor.
Wow.
So I started in Lawndale, Commonwealth Baptist, 1985 at 26. And I really came, my dad was a pastor. I didn't want to preach.
Yeah.
And he passed away in 81, and I felt the burden.
Yeah.
And I came home in 82 to preach. And by January of 85, I was in my first church, and a small church. I was unanimously elected by all 15 members. In 1985,
you got the vote.
I got the vote. So, but it was a community that I was a part of that believed in me, and so I was there for 8 or 9 years, and then I've been at Pilgrim a little over 30 years in West Garfield Park. Went to McCormick Theological Seminary. So I actually did my master's at Georgetown and then came home to preach, and then ended up going to McCormick from about 93 to 98. And so pastoring during that time, and of course we're doing, community development.
Yeah.
And so I came home to do what I'm doing. And it's amazing to me how God will really give you exactly what you desire.
Yeah.
Which is why you better be careful what you desire. Because I remember not asking God for the biggest church or that. I wanted social justice as a ministry, but I wanted it organic, like a real congregation in church. Yeah. And I wanted longevity. And I've learned. I know people that wanted the biggest building, and they got that.
Yeah.
Not so much of an asset these days.
Right.
But God will give you what you ask for. So really, it's been an incredible journey, and my wife and I have 4 children. We have 5.5 grandchildren, 1 on the way.
Nice.
And so it's been an incredible journey.
So your work in social justice in Chicago primarily. Yeah. You then joined forces with great activists from Chicago. Can you tell me about the work?
Yeah, really mentored going back to about 99. So, I was young and had just come to do Mount Pilgrim, which is in West Garfield Park in about, 93. And so, I'd always kind of admired Adam Clayton Powell as a congressman, so I really did have political aspirations. And so I had this opportunity to run for a state representative. I had the congressmen and others came to me. They saw, what they considered my potential. Yeah. And so I had just gotten to that church maybe 4 or 5 years. We were just about to pay off the mortgage and hadn't done it. It had been very destabilizing for that congregation. And so I just felt God say no. And I was angry. I mean, I didn't like it. I felt stifled, And so I did, and I told the Lord, I said, well, I'm going to do something. And I applied for a sabbatical to Harvard in 99. Yeah. And I had a great application. I had a Georgetown professor who was poet laureate of Maryland, who was a mentor of mine and a congressman and so on. And I got the fellowship with the faculty there. And so, I remember my mentor, Roland Flint at Georgetown. I was saying, it's just a fellowship. It's not a big deal. He said, Mashall, anything at Harvard is a big deal. And so, it ended up being a pretty big deal, honestly. And so, I do that in the first part of 99. I'm at a revival in Cambridge. And there's this sister who used to come on locally here. Her name was Bishop Coletta Jackson, I think her name. She used to do the Awakening on Saturday night, and she'd say, "Take the city." That was her. She was doing revival.
I didn't miss an episode of Awakening.
And I'm sitting in this church, and it was called the Massachusetts Avenue Baptist Church, even though it was now on New Hampshire Avenue in Cambridge. And she's preaching this incredible sermon on Samson's consecration. And then she starts, with great charismatic fanfare. She's throwing water, and nobody knows me. I'm sitting there, with my 3-piece green suit on, and water's dripping down my glasses, and I'm standing there getting the refreshing. She's
you get it.
refilling her pitcher and slinging it on folks. And she said, "This is a man in whom there's no guile." And she says, And something's going to happen for you by the end of this year.
So this was like a charismatic, prophetic type Pentecostal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Including, a $77 offering at the end that I gave because I believed.
Yeah.
Even though, I saw a husband sit there as a guy with white shoes on, I figured, well, that's where my money goes.
That's where it's going.
But I didn't care, I'm so.
You got a word.
Yeah,
right,
I got a
right.
word. And that was in May. And that summer when I got back, I had gotten a message, folks that were affiliated with Rainbow Push, and of course Reverend Jesse Jackson was very big in '99, and that he was looking for a place to preach on the west side because he was coming through to go somewhere else. And so I had him there, and by October, there was this relationship where I was preaching his birthday piece at Push. And then by November, he had this big campaign thing going on down in Decatur. And it ended up almost an international story about these kids getting kicked out of school. And I ended up like a top lieutenant. By the end of the year, I was traveling. We went to Israel in 2001, for example, right before 9/11.
So you got elevated in this Rainbow Push world.
It was such an incredible trip. 7 of us in this delegation, guest of the Jerusalem Council of Churches, met at the airport by Sharon Peres. At that point, Reverend Jackson was treated like a head of state.
Right.
We go across Gaza. Next, we're meeting with Arafat with a boss on his side, and it's an incredible way to see the Holy Land. I had done the tourist thing the year before.
Yeah.
But, that was my mentorship as a local pastor.
Yeah.
Traveling with Reverend Jackson, who kind of could always figure out how to get him a free staff member is to get a pastor that pays his own way, right? But it was an incredible season of mentoring.
Yeah.
And then over time, we started our own organization, the Leaders Network, with some pastors, West Side based, and we do a lot of stuff. Now I have a credit union that we just launched with in a partnership with Great Lakes, and so and then my own Sankofa Wellness Village in West Garfield Park is going to be a $50 million development that breaks ground in April, and so it's it's been God giving you exactly what you asked for. And then that's the neighborhood that Dr. King organized in.
That's where he organized.
That's right. West
so
Garfield Park, Lawndale.
Because we're Chicago folks. Tell me about the implications of MLK coming through Chicago.
Yeah.
Right? Because it starts there, right?
It
for
starts.
us, for our story.
On the west side.
On the west side, it starts there. Like, can we start there? And then
Dr. King organizes primarily on the west side, although he has these south side relationships. And those that know about Black Chicago, there is a distinct disconnect between the south side and the west side.
Yeah.
The south side is multi-generational African American. It's urbane. Folks that have just been impactful in American history that come from there. Louis Armstrong lived there. Jack Johnson lived there. Muhammad Ali lived there. Jesse Jackson lived there. John Johnson, the founder of Ebony and it's the South Side.
Yeah.
The West Side, not so much. The later migrants from the South, that last part of the Great Migration, it's a little more country.
Yeah.
A little more connected to the rural South. Mississippi, Arkansas, Tennessee.
Yeah.
And so, that's the roots that we come out of.
Right.
Dr. King organizes on the West Side because Chicago is so locked down as a political fiefdom of old man Richard Daley that he organizes on the West Side because the black people on that side of town were sufficiently disconnected from the power dynamic that he could organize there.
So
he
he
could
knew
not
that.
organize on the South Side.
So did he try to organize on the South Side?
Yeah, he was invited by Al Raby, who was an incredible organizer because, as African Americans came into the city, particularly on the West Side, instead of building schools, they had these sort of trailers that they were sending kids to, and they called them Willis wagons because Willis was the superintendent. So Al Raby organized parents to talk about the disinvestment in black kids on part of Chicago public school system. And that was part of the movement that brought Dr. King to Chicago because a lot of it had to do with residential segregation and schools. And so he comes to Chicago and is based on the West Side because these are the newest arriving migrants.
From the South.
From the South.
Oh,
migrants.
Migrants. Right. Say that again. Right.
From the South.
And so he organizes on the West Side.
Yeah, 1966.
And where do we go from there?
Well, Dr. King is assassinated in 68. So in 66, he becomes like this national leader now, talking about segregation in the North, not just the South.
Right.
By 67, he opposes the war in Vietnam, gives the Why I Oppose the War in Vietnam sermon at the Riverside Church in Manhattan in New York, which is the Rockefeller Church.
Yes.
Which is sort of like the paradigm, the Vatican of American Baptists, Riverside Church in New York. And of course, it's almost a year to the day he's assassinated.
Because of that ministry.
That prophetic ministry, and people who were close to him said, you just signed your death warrant. He said, I know.
He knew it.
And, if you ever want to just work up a good cry on purpose, find that tape on YouTube of Dr. King trying to explain when everybody comes against him. The New York Times eviscerates him. Other civil rights leaders try to save their hide, say you've dabbled, you've crossed the line, you've done irreparable harm to the civil rights movement. So he's isolated.
His own people.
Oh, yeah, on all sides. The black militants are calling him, delawed, derisively. and so he that tape that I'm always moved by is him trying to explain why for him it was a matter of conviction. That he says, you didn't understand me. I tried to tell you I was a preacher and I must listen to God and I must testify that a Vietnamese baby has the same value as a baby in the United States.
Yeah, so
that globalist prophetic ministry,
which is that's why I lean into King in terms of you know what I mean. I pastor a multi-ethnic church, which you can't have a multi-ethnic church without talking about racial justice, disparity, right? But King is like. King fits everybody. Like everybody's going to use Martin Luther King weekend. Every white church, black church. He seems safe in a lot of spaces. Why is that? Is that because of his inclusion?
Because he's reinterpreted.
Yeah.
Because it's not the real King.
Yeah, right.
Cornel West calls it, he's been Santa Clausified. Turned into sort of this endearing, I have a dream guy. Right.
And so that's where I've seen like white evangelical churches say, oh, we're safe with King. I've seen other churches, we're safe with King. Who is the real King? Who is King to the church as a prophetic voice?
Whoever has the courage to tell the truth, which often has been the role of the black preacher in America. I mean, because often the word of God comes from the bottom of empire. It comes from the bottom of empire in Egypt.
Yeah.
Comes from the bottom of empire in the exile. Comes from the bottom of empire under Roman occupation. And I think that the future testifies in the apocalypse. The word of God, the presence of God, the movement of God, the kingdom of God comes from the bottom of the power dynamic. And so whenever you're looking for God, go to the bottom.
Say it.
It's why when in seminary, what is the dynamic theology now is womanist theology, which is the black woman. Because who has less power than a black woman in the slaveocracy of America, who has no agency over her own body? And when the slave trade was disallowed in the early 1800s, and America began to interbreed to create the market for slaves, the black woman's womb became the economic engine of the American empire. And so no agency over her body. So where would God be?
Yeah.
In that slave cabin with that black woman whose rape is systemic and legal, who has no agency, no humanity that anybody is bound to respect, black or white man. And so, and here we are, in the early part of the 21st century, and what theology has the most dynamism in our seminaries? That's the voice of black women, saying this is what it feels like. And particularly dark-skinned black women with the colorism, you see.
Yeah.
You can't understand Oprah Winfrey's phenomena until you understand colorism. And where she came from, and when she came to Chicago, and what she encountered, not just but in black communities, that colorism, it was very real.
It's a very real thing.
And so that's why the color purple piece is so. Well, it's part of racism.
That's what I'm saying.
It's the stratum of racism. If you black, get back. If you brown, stick around. If you white, you all right. So the further you are away from the ideal of beauty and of ultimate humanity, the less human you are, the less agency you have as a human being when it comes to racism.
Willie Jennings calls it glorified white bodies, which becomes
glorified
the
white
baseline for how we measure
humanity. How we measure the value of humanity. That's what makes sin, racism, sin. Because it devalues what is made in the image of God and makes that less than some other glorified definition of humanity.
So King is a Southern preacher. He begins a movement organically. What is he doing? Like for people, you're right. We kind of stuff him in I Have a Dream, and we've kind of Santa Claused him. But organically, what is King doing prophetically to address all of that we just talked about?
Well, I think ultimately he challenges everybody with a vision of what he would eventually call beloved community.
Would you consider his approach multicultural?
I think yes. I mean, I think that, King, to the dismay of some of those that were, sort of on the radical part of in the black community, the militant, was above defining himself as a black man. I mean, at my most human, I understand it. I don't see myself as a black man. I see myself as a human being. Now, I may be forced to live in a racialized society and I have to respond to that.
Yes.
And I understand it, and I have to comprehend it, and I have to process it. But in the depth of who I am, I'm a human being. And everybody else is. And none are no better. And all are beneath the cross, deficient.
Yeah.
And in need of salvation. But so I think the king evolves. I think he starts in the black church as a son of the black church, literally as a prince of the black church. Yeah. Those of us that have been PKs.
Yeah.
Sort of like the biography of Adam Clayton Powell, that was done by public broadcasting, where Roy Wilkinson's son, sort of eulogizes Adam Powell and says, as a black man, so light skinned, he could have passed for white, but he identified with the Negro.
Yeah.
But yet he's broken at the end. And he talks about him being born as a pastor's son at Abyssinian Church, which at one time, under Adam Powell Sr., the father, was the largest Protestant congregation in North America. Not the largest black church, the largest church in Harlem. And he's born into that. And so, Wilkins says he's born as high as you can be born in the black community. But yet even he is broken by the end.
Wow.
And so there's an incredible psychological price that that is exacted for those of us born, in this empire that is colorized.
So King begins to speak to the humanity.
Oh yeah.
As a gospel-centered preacher.
Yeah.
And he looks beyond. He has to address color because of the racial dynamics.
Yeah.
But he looks beyond that to say that there's a humanity that we're ignoring.
Yeah, and I think he was in stages of growth when you look at.
Yeah.
I'm a little disturbed. There's a bio on King by a guy named Jonathan EIG, and we, scheduled by the end of February to host him with a Jewish congregation and a white Protestant congregation. In the west quarter of Chicago, but I really am. My son and I have talked about it. Who's coming to Northern, by the way?
Let's go.
Yeah,
let's go, Marshall.
Yeah, but we, that we can't let King be taken from us because we understand him in ways. When I read the biography, I said, okay, it's partially true. I don't know if the whole spirit of King is captured because you can't without understanding organically the black church. He's a product of that. And then he grows and he expands.
So you can see the succession.
You can see the evolution of his
scholarship,
of his
theology,
thought.
his thought. In the movement.
He's actually pampered. He's a middle-class Negro. King's family went to Europe for vacations on ship. So he's born at the top of the black aristocracy.
So he's coming from a whole different vantage point. He had to learn.
By the time he dies, he is the mentor to Stokely Carmichael, who becomes Kwame Ture.
Yeah.
He's trying to pastor and evangelize and mentor militants whose experiences is far from him.
Right.
And so he's undergoing a spiritual transformation. That's what you have to know when you're looking at. He's undergoing. He does the kitchen table conversion. That I used to teach it as the baptism of the Holy Spirit, which it's really more charismatic than it is Baptist, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's kind of when one is baptized in purpose, and then there's no looking back.
Yeah.
And so that happens when King's house is bombed in Montgomery, and he's at the kitchen table and he tells it and he uses it in the sermons that, you know, he couldn't call his daddy, he couldn't call his mama, you know, he was under threat. They threatened to kill his family. He gets this call. He said the voice said, N-word, if you don't get out of town in 3 days, we're going to blow your head off. Now, see, this is 1954. And so he says he sits at the table and tries to drink coffee, and that didn't help him. And he remembers, you know, he can't call his daddy. And he says that's really when he encountered God in a way that was exclusive of the pampering he had grown up as a preacher's son. And he embraces and he closes that, you know, that narrative out with I've seen the lightning flashing and he promised never to leave me.
Yeah.
And it's almost at that point, there's this baptism of the Spirit, and he follows this path wherever it goes. Now, the book Hampton Sides called Hellhound on This Trail is the one that takes you, I think, as close into the psychic of King, that he really offers himself 13 years after that incident and declares, because remember, this is one of the most famous people in the world. I know it's hard for these mega pastors to understand.
Yeah.
But he has no bodyguards. He has no armor bearers. He becomes this international symbol of nonviolence, so he can't have armed protection.
It would be a contradiction.
It'd be a contradiction. And then he says, you know, to himself, his state of mind, because he'd been so maligned, was that, and hounded by the FBI, and hounded by, you know, by assassins. Maybe if they kill me, it will energize the movement. The very definition of a martyr. No bodyguards, no protection, and your own government surveilling
everything
and harassing you. And your only office is a Baptist preacher. I still try to wrap my mind around that. Your only real job is the co-pastor of the Ebenezer Baptist Church.
That's all you.
That ain't even the largest church in that community. It's not. I preached at the Second Baptist Church up the street years ago. It was the first church in the South to have air conditioner off of Auburn Avenue. And then the Wheat Street Church. Now, Ebenezer wasn't even the largest church in its neighborhood.
What does that say, though, about the power of the gospel?
The power of
that he's an associate pastor, preacher from the South. The entire government is surveilling him.
Yeah.
And he's preaching a nonviolent reconciliation.
Well, you know, it's so inspiring for anybody that really wants to follow Jesus. Because I'm convinced, reading everything I can read and every you know, as a kingologist.
Yeah.
You know, I was 10 years old when he's assassinated, captivated by the mountaintops at 10 years old.
Yeah.
And there's a whole generation of us called into ministry from the King example. But I can tell you this, he saw himself following Jesus to the cross. That's how he sees himself. And whatever, you know, my particular journey is, that's what I want to be.
What
and to live that way, whatever that means.
Yeah, and you may have answered this already, but you know, today, you know, this day where we are now, What does King walk into our churches and say? What is he saying? Because I imagine it would be a lot of what he's already prophetically uttered. However, things are still dark, right?
Well, I tell you, I know he would be. What will King say? That's always the proverbial question, right?
Yeah.
The world is on the verge of world war. And that's just the truth. Before seminary, my first degrees were political science. My first master's degree is government, Georgetown University. I just want to go to D.C.
Yeah, yeah.
At a time when, the conservatives really ran the Department of Government at Georgetown. So, defense policy, geopolitics, that was a background that I have. I could tell you we're on the road to world war. And as one who comes into the church from the outside, I don't consider myself an insider because of the way I came into ministry, really.
Right.
I'm amazed at how detached the church is from the reality that we're going into world war. It's sort of like, studying King and studying Bonhoeffer. Why do we still look at these people? It wasn't because of their priestly ministry. It's because of their prophetic ministry.
Yeah, to government.
Yeah, and we're a world at war.
Have we lost our voice to government?
In many ways, yes. But that's always been true. So a minority of the church and church leaders supported King. A minority supported Bonhoeffer. A minority supported Jesus, who preached that real prophets are slain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't want that smoke now.
We don't want that doubt. We building churches and we want to,
Because I think about mega pastors who are counsel to presidents.
Yeah.
And political figures. Have we then not entered into like true prophetic edge, or have we kind of like walked into the demise of capitalism and we've just kind of assimilated ourselves into?
Yeah, I think there's a real reckoning going on.
Okay.
One of the things that's very interesting to me is post-pandemic.
Yeah.
When one of the narratives on social media, in addition to being in an era when everything is critiqued. It can be redefined and it's open to critique.
Yeah.
And there's, no automatic, genuflect to authority or institutions.
Yeah.
You have to earn whatever respect you're going to have.
Right.
The narrative on social media is we're going toward, this is post-church. It's like Europe. It's post-Christian. And people are bragging. I don't go to church anymore.
It's a brag, right?
I don't need church. We found out we don't need it.
Right.
And then plus, look at it.
Yeah.
It's all a fraud anyway.
But the evidence is there.
Yeah.
They can point to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do we redeem that?
Well, I really, the pandemic was such a revival for us in the setting I'm in. Of course, I'm at the bottom of the empire over there.
Yeah.
And so it was really cleansing. Because, I have a traditional Baptist church for the most part. And, but, since the pandemic, nobody worries about who could stand at the pulpit no more. Because at one time, wasn't nobody in there.
Nobody was there. Yeah.
Or what somebody got on. Or are we going to have a banquet? None of that never comes up. It's beautiful. We just do ministry. You know,
Yeah.
we had the George Floyd riots on the same commercial strip that were the MLK riots, half a block from my church. My church smelled like smoke and was untouched in the George Floyd riots 1 and 2 in 2020. And so the grocery store was burned, and so we went into food, ministry. That's how the saints start collecting. We're not in the building, meet on the parking lot. We're giving out food. And so we came through pandemic like that, and then part of my offer ministry to young men who were never going to shelter in place. So they're doing devotional every day. So they never stop, and they never stop getting saved. They never stop getting baptized. And so that kind of ministry caused our church to have a certain dynamism that thrived in the post-pandemic world, in the pandemic and the post-pandemic world. So I don't know how churches do without that kind of, you don't have to go looking for ministry. It comes to you.
A part of the revival is what you've already stated, is that you're going to find Jesus at the bottom of the empire.
Yeah, and authenticity.
Authenticity.
Is what is our only hope now.
Right. That's all we got.
That's all we got. It's Jesus.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this question a little bit different in light of Martin Luther King. What is you've been a West Side pastor, an activist, a voice, a leader. What is your view of the multi-ethnic church?
I think that I don't know if it should be labeled as that. Your church is one of the few congregations that I'm aware of that is considered multi-ethnic,
Black led.
with African American leadership.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of another one.
I got a couple. You probably don't know.
I just don't know 'em.
Yeah.
And so that's a very unusual, because now you've been able to not only have a multi-ethnic congregation, but you've been able to infuse probably some of the best of that Black Christian tradition that comes from the bottom of empire.
Yeah.
To not be a marginal part of the congregational life,
Right.
but to be a part of the central narrative.
Yes.
It's not a Black church, so it doesn't have to be an exclusive narrative.
Right.
But it, by definition, because there's African American leadership, it is a central part of that narrative. Whereas opposed if we say multicultural, the way we often see it,
Right.
which is white leadership, and then it's sort of a Black add-on, sort of the minstrel show of the music, and maybe some emotionalism or so on, a little flavor, but it's marginal.
Right.
The power is really not shared.
Right. Well, what one thing I'm passionate about is the richness of the Black church experience has been stereotyped in a way, almost like a sitcom to white people. But if you have never stepped in the experience of the richness of Black ecclesiology, and we consider ourselves multi-ethnic, so you're right, we don't say we're a Black church, but the elements of what comes from a West Side Black church experience, I don't think you can ever beat that. I don't think you can, and this is me, you know what I mean? But when I look at other cultures that experience the richness of the organ or the hymn or the call and response or a Black preaching experience, whatever the case may be, I feel like so many people missed out on that because of the polarization.
Or the seriousness, really.
Yeah.
Because people from the bottom of the American empire, we call Black is at the bottom. And I have a Jewish friend who's a great guy, and he said to me once, he said, Pastor, we Jews owe you Black people such a instead of gratitude. He said, because when we got here, the bottom was already occupied.
Oh, man.
And when you knew what they were fleeing from Europe,
Yeah.
you understand the profundity of that. So black is the bottom. And it's still the bottom. It's so that, the only way to get agency is to be an honorary white.
Yeah.
Whatever that is.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the richness of the black church tradition that comes from the bottom is because people have nothing else, which is, how you teach Intro to the Black Church Studies. You have to first understand these people have nothing else coming out of slavery but the church. Nothing else.
So this is not about...
There is no black.
Right. This is not about style.
No.
Texture. This is about pop.
You want me to tell you what it really is?
What's that?
It's taking Jesus seriously, because that's all you have. And there's no other example you can point to than what you saw at Mother Emanuel when 8 people were killed on that Father's Day. But you didn't see anything. You never seen the families in less than 24 hours say, well, I know we have to forgive you. And it angers a lot of black people. And I've been on black radio where they say, we tired of having to forgive people. And I said, because white people would never. And I said, that almost makes sense to me. Except white people are not my standard of humanity. Jesus is.
Yeah.
And that's where those Southern blacks were coming from. Because they come out of a tradition that it's not like Jesus is a fairy tale.
Right.
They have to take Jesus completely serious.
Because they had nothing else.
Nothing else. And another distinctive is Jesus before resurrection.
Yeah.
That is black religion. Because the after resurrection doesn't help me necessarily get through what I got to deal with. I need a fellow sufferer. I need to stay by the cross.
Yeah.
I can't move too fast to the tomb. I've got to let me linger, because the beat down is what's capturing my imagination and my spirit based on what I'm going through.
That's what I'm related
That's
to.
black religion.
That's good.
It's that rooted in Christ. I preached at Calvin. I don't know if they really got it at Calvin University because I didn't get invited back. But I was trying to say, they gave me rooted in Christ. I said, in this black church tradition, it's rooted in Jesus Christ before the resurrection as a fellow sufferer because of the oppression.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. I when I grew up in the church, we didn't really talk about Christ that much.
Right.
We talked about Jesus.
Right.
Who
understands.
Because Christ seems a little sanitized and a little, privileged. But Jesus.
We know what he would.
Oh man, my father used to have a member boy. I used it as an illustration several times. And back in the old church, your grandfather, they never preached without going through the passion.
Never.
The agony.
Not once.
It always, no matter what this sermon was about, it always end up, because you remember.
Yeah.
They whipped him all night long, But so my dad used to, do the rehearsing of the passion and it was a member, her name was Miss Baker. Light-skinned lady, and boy, I remember as a little boy. And then somewhere when Jesus is rising and falling with the cross, she jump up and say, Lord, help Jesus. Somebody help Jesus.
Somebody.
He need help.
Yeah.
Because that's what the bottom of empire latches on to, and it's why the future of the church is apparently in the southern hemisphere. It's where the former colonies where people have suffered, that the church is exploding, because there's something about God with us, Emmanuel, that speaks to the human condition, particularly at the bottom of power dynamics.
That's so good. Well, for Christmas, I've done this twice already. I preached a quote from you. You said this quote when you spoke at the Northern Seminary graduation 2-3 years ago, and you said you will always find Jesus in the lowly places.
In the lowly places.
And I give you credit.
Always.
But I took that thing, man, and I preached I don't know what it is about that line for me. And you've expounded upon it today, but it's just something, it helps my congregation understand the significance of gospel mission.
Yeah.
Because at the end, when we're talking about race, when we're talking about injustice, it's really about the margin. It's really about the bottom of the empire. And when we've seen racism, when we've seen segregation, it's because the empire has intruded upon and negated the marginalized.
Yeah. And race, I mean, the victims, one of the pronounced victims of race is white people. Because race is used to make people feel better than they ought to feel about what they're experiencing.
Yeah, yeah.
And so literally people vote against their own interests based upon some social construct of, at least I'm white. And it becomes very manipulative and a way to divide people.
Yeah.
You know, sort of a William Barber who's kind of gone around with his movement on the poor people and so on, but he talks about fusion, and there's this mythology of right after slavery that there was this coming together of black folk and white folk that was like the possibilities of what America could have been. You know, if people would have just seen the commonness, you know what I mean? Like America is, the book is called Prophet of Freedom. It's a great book, guy named Brinkley, on Frederick Douglass. So when it comes to America, Frederick Douglass is the real founding father. Because he's the first one that really visions America as a place where all the tired and the poor from all over the planet can come. And there's room at the cross for you. You know, there's a place for you.
Everybody.
You can make a contribution here.
Yeah.
You can be judged on your content of your character.
Yeah.
On what you have to offer.
Yeah.
That is Frederick Douglass's vision of America.
That's powerful.
Not George Washington.
So what do you say as we celebrate Martin Luther King? What do you want to say to the church as it relates to how do we recognize and how do we properly appreciate his contribution to the church?
There's always the struggle, and particularly, you know, in America, because we've turned nationalism into the civic religion, jingoism really, and racism. And so the challenge is always to allow for Jesus to define Jesus' self instead of us having a presupposed definition. Because I wrestle sometimes. I just don't know if we got the same Jesus all the time.
Right.
You know, because I don't know how a person can follow Jesus of Nazareth and come to some of these conclusions of the worthlessness of other people or the lack of empathy or the lack of compassion But I mean, I don't think get anywhere questioning people's, faith. But I just, I just wonder if we really know Jesus of Nazareth and not Jesus of Norway, and somehow always trying to get back to Jesus of Nazareth, like Howard Thurman challenges us, Jesus and the Disinherited, to get back to Jesus of Nazareth without the baggage of European Christianity and that history, which is, about the creation of Europe as much as it is about the faith. It's how the faith helped Europe create itself. And in some ways co-opted faith, which is why there had to be a Reformation. But Roman Catholicism wasn't the only Christianity on the planet. There's an Eastern Church. And then the oldest organized Christians in the world were probably evangelized by Mark in Ethiopia and southern Egypt. That Coptic church is older than Rome in its organization. And so, it's really kind of, what really allowing the Lord to self-define as opposed to us trying to create a God in our own image is what is always a challenge for organized religion. Part of the problem with being the church is we read the scriptures wrong. And we always imagine ourselves as the disciples. See, we the disciples. Not once you're organized, you may not be. Because once you're organized religion, you might want to be challenged to find out, are we the Pharisees?
Are we the oppressors?
Are we the Pharisees?
Yeah.
Organized religion.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with being organized.
Yeah.
As long as the organization is designed to carry out the mission. But when the organization in and of itself becomes like, we're not the arbiters of the kingdom. The church is only good when it is useful as a vehicle of the kingdom. It could be the kingdom, but it might not be. And God, if you look very closely, has the ability to operate with or without us.
Man.
There's an incredible spirituality going on with a lot of these young folks that, in error, because, everybody needs a pastor.
Right.
But there's a hunger. I can tell you that.
God's going to tap
in
into
the
that.
worst places. In the worst places. And some of the work that I've seen going on in our community with some of the ministries where we have, it just reminds me of first century Christianity where you got these young men in these life and death do or die circumstances. And they're evangelizers. Some of them have, backgrounds in incarceration and they're saved. And the narrative that seems to have so much import is, if you want to save your life, get in this kingdom. But they don't mean your proverbial life. They mean your life on the west side.
Right.
Where you could be a statistic.
Right.
You need to get in this kingdom.
So you can be saved.
Literally.
This is too good, Pastor. Hey, I appreciate you coming on.
I'm glad to do
this
it.
was so
Glad to
rich
be
for
here.
me and for everybody.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, who's going to watch this. So, you're going to find Pastor Hatch, pastored on the West Side, 39 years, activist, a leader, also a professor. And, we're going to talk more about this moving forward, but we're going to be launching at Northern Seminary a Black Studies degree that you're going to have a heavy part in leading. And I'm excited about that because we need to learn Black ecclesiology in order to better understand what God is doing in the overall church. So thank you, Pastor Hatch.
Thank you for having me and for what you do.
Thank you.
And for your forward look and being on the cutting edge. We appreciate how God uses you in this season.
Thank you, sir. Gospel and Race Podcast. We're out.